welcome to The Edge, where we'll take an in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We'll bring you not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topics with expert opinion and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. Former US President Donald Trump has filed a lawsuit against tech giants Google, Twitter and Facebook, claiming that he's the victim of censorship. The class action lawsuit also targets 3 companies' CEOs that Trump was suspended from his social accounts in January over public safety concerns in the wake of the Capitol riots led by his supporters. Does Trump stand a chance? The European Union's climate monitoring service said that North America witnessed its hottest June on record, battered by a deadly heatwave searing parts of the region, adding that its findings illustrate the effects of global warming. What can be done to protect our world from the effects of climate change? And Turkey's health ministry's vaccination campaign against coronavirus exceeded 54 million doses, as Turkey leads a successful campaign against the coronavirus pandemic with one of the best vaccination figures around the world. Which measures has Turkey taken, and what is behind its success? These are the top 3 topics that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. Former US President Donald Trump said his class action lawsuit filed in South Florida targets CEOs Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Jack Dorsey of Twitter, and Sundar Pichai of Google and Alphabet. Our following infographic has more about Trump's move. Former US President Donald Trump has filed a lawsuit against social media giants Facebook, Twitter and Google for restricting his freedom of speech.
President Donald J. Trump.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday said he was filing lawsuits against Twitter, Facebook and Alphabet's Google, as well as their chief executives, alleging they silence conservative viewpoints.
Dude, I'm filing.
Trump said he filed the lawsuits in federal court in Florida. He said he would seek class action status in the suits, which would seek restitution and punitive damages. He did not specify who the other members of the class action were.
We're demanding an end to the shadow banning, a stop to the silencing, and a stop to the blacklisting, banishing, and canceling that you know so well. Our case will prove this censorship is unlawful, it's unconstitutional, and it's completely un-American. We all know that. We all know that very, very well. Our filing also seeks injunctive relief to allow prompt restitution and really restoration, and you can name about 20 other things, and it has to be prompt because it's destroying our country.
Trump lost his social media megaphone earlier this year after repeatedly falsely claiming that his election defeat was the result of widespread fraud, an assertion that was rejected by multiple courts, state election officials, and members of his own administration. Hundreds of his supporters launched a deadly assault on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th after Trump repeated those false claims in a fiery speech near the White House.
And to discuss this, I'm joined live from New York by Mark Merowich, who's a professor at State University of New York Maritime College and political analyst. Mark, thank you for joining us here today on The Edge. First of all, could you just explain for us what is this this case that Donald Trump has filed, and what does it hope to achieve?
Well, I'm also a lawyer, so I enjoy reading lawsuits. I read the lawsuit, and it is hilarious. It wouldn't pass muster in a first-year law school class. The lawyers he hired obviously were laughing all the way to their legal fees, but in any event, what's the case about? What he says is that they shamed him and banned him from Twitter, and they violated the First Amendment right of free speech that he has, and they also have too much power to do that under the law, which is the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, which basically allows social media to do exactly what they did, which is to take people off the platforms, and they have no liability. They only have liability for certain types of speech, but in effect, they have no liability. So he's saying, Trump, that's not right. That law is terrible. We should get rid of that and make them liable. And secondly, I have a right of free speech. But at the same time, these companies have the right of free speech. So the whole thing ends up to be panned like a bad movie.
Right.
I suppose.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a very, from my limited understanding, I'm not a lawyer, but from my limited understanding from reading various articles about it, there is a great deal of shock and even shock at some of the support that this has been given. Alan Dershowitz, who's, I understand, a reputable lawyer, has come out fully in support of this. And yet, as you say, the claim of free speech, let's break it down. So the claim of the right to free speech, who is that owed to and who has that right?
Well, of course, the whole point here is that the Constitution binds the federal and state governments to make sure that they cannot infringe free speech. Now, here's the problem. Twitter and Facebook and YouTube are private companies. So they don't have an obligation of what the Constitution binds states and federal government. But what Trump's lawyers say is that, you know what, they're like a state actor because, you know, they actually have so much power. And also because the congressmen, particularly the Democrats, have actually energized them to allow them to basically be so powerful and exempt them from liability. So they kind of rise, according to Trump's lawyers, to the level of a state actor, which would be bound by the First Amendment. Now, the other thing that's very important is that he brought this as a class action. Why is that important? Because if you can bring it as a class action, that means that the hundreds of millions of Twitter users would also be in the lawsuit. Mm-hmm. That would be formidable. So again, all these tactics and techniques, and respect for Alan Dershowitz, he's a very brilliant lawyer, but on this one, I think he doesn't get an A+.
Oh dear, and I'm sure that counts for a lot in New York. So the free speech is something that the government has to recognise under the First Amendment, but not private companies. Right. And so obviously that's problematic. Now, one would expect, if this is such an important, I think it was Dershowitz again who said that this is one of the most important cases of the 21st century for First Amendment rights. And yet the lawyers that have been attracted to this case don't appear to be First Amendment specialists.
Well, if you look at who they are, I mean, they're not, as you say, they're not Floyd Abrams or other First Amendment experts. But if you look at the case, I think the key to it, the linchpin of it is that the fact is that Twitter's status rises beyond that of a private company to be a state actor. That's the hurdle that they need to overcome here, because, I mean, it's first-grade constitutional law that the First Amendment does not apply to private companies. And furthermore, the law says that the Facebooks and Twitters of the world are not liable for what is posted. So in other words, they don't have liability, and at the same time, they're not the state government. So you can make arguments, but these arguments have been panned. I should also mention, I think in Florida, there have been some test cases where I think they tried to pass a law that said that the social media companies can't ban people. And I think a federal judge had threw that out. I mean, that does not fly. Now, you'd have to overcome Mount Kilimanjaro of the law to get to the next point, because here's the problem. Trump clearly has standing to bring the case. No doubt he's injured and they took him off Twitter, so he can bring a case and say on some basis they injured him or defamed him or something. But a class action means that everybody's similarly situated, right? Sort of in a case where there's a defective product in commerce and everybody who bought it can bring a lawsuit against the company. But here, he brings a number of Twitter's users, like this one woman, and Linda Quadros, and also American Conservative Union, to show, oh, gee, they said something, and Twitter banned them or Facebook banned them. Well, that does not fly. That doesn't go to his injury. That goes to their injury. If he could overcome these hurdles and bring in hundreds of millions of people in a lawsuit against social media, that would be like a nuclear reactor of a case. But it can't even get off phase one because it can't overcome the hurdle of having a legitimate case or controversy that is recognized and justiciable in the law. Now, Professor Dershowitz is a brilliant jurist, and maybe he's come up with some idea or theory. He's brilliant, and I don't diminish that. But I think this one, I think legal experts other than Professor Dershowitz have said, as one commentator said, Trump has got the First Amendment all wrong, and the case is dead on arrival. This is another expert on the First Amendment. Now, will a judge accept this case? The chances are, I think, 0.
Right. So it seems like a case of the users, whoever they are, that have been banned, including Donald Trump and any other that might want to join the class action, would behove themselves to read the terms and conditions of the various platforms that they're going on. And for example, one of the other anomalies in this case is that the terms and conditions say that for Facebook to be sued, the case needs to be filed in California. So again, is this another first-year law school fault?
Well, sure it is. Also, I would say this. I mean, when you sign up for Facebook, or Twitter or whatever, there's a little button you press and hundreds of pages, right? And you're supposed to press I agree, and then you can sign up. Well, I mean, yes, that's law school. I mean, can you come back later and say, gee, I really didn't read it, and I didn't know that I have to sue in California? It's questionable. I mean, that raises an interesting question. Some would say it's a contract of adhesion in the sense that they give you the contract, you can't change it, you've got to take it or leave it. On the other hand, you press the button, you agree to it, and you're using Facebook and Twitter, and now, when you're not happy, you come along and say, oh my God, I just read the fine print. I don't know if that works, but that one has a chance for an individual to sue, but not a class action. Here's the other point. Hey, Facebook and Twitter, they have rights under the Constitution too. They have a right of free speech against the government also. So in other words, a lot of people have rights around here. And then Trump's rights, I don't think, even as a former president, exceed or beyond anybody else's rights. So the question is, the social media this is a publicity event, right? But the question, a serious question about social media, the really serious, I had this in one of my classes, I gave this as the final exam, is to look at this liability ban on the social media. They're not liable for anything that's posted on social media, with some limited exceptions. That is a big issue, and that's a serious issue. And that's the one a politician like President Trump should focus on, and not whether or not he got banned personally and gee whiz, that hurt him and he was shamed and all of that. The question is, should social media be be absolved from liability when there might be arguably hate speech or terrible things that people post? I mean, we know that. And there's absolutely nothing that can go against the social media companies on that. They are completely insulated from liability. That one, to me, is a serious public policy issue, which the Congress and the Senate have been looking at, whether or not to get rid of that ban on liability. But at the present time, they're kind of nuclear proof on those lawsuits, even on things that are posted. So I think that on this case, and by the way, I think it was Facebook had a committee that looked at the ban on an internal committee, and that's a very, very prudent thing to do. Mm-hmm. Get someone who's a neutral party to look at these cases and see whether or not it's appropriate to ban someone, and to have standards. They have standards, and in their view, Trump's rhetoric was divisive and problematic, and they are a business. I mean, Facebook is not a utility. It's not a state actor. It's not a government agency. It's a private company, and private companies can make decisions.
The interesting thing wanting to scrap this liability law, which I think is the 230 law you were speaking of earlier, the interesting thing about that is if that were scrapped and Trump were allowed back onto the platform and he said something that was detrimental to society, then Facebook could be sued for Trump's post. So it seems that that he's coming against himself inside his own case to try and protect himself.
Well, we call that a Pandora's box.
Right.
When you open it up, you never know what could happen. Of course, does he really mean what he says? Well, this is the point about Section 230 or anything else. We know that the rhetoric that he has used is it's done for self-aggrandizement and self-promotion. I mean, that's why he's bringing the suit. He's not bringing the suit because he feels that, I don't think so, I didn't ask him, but I don't think he's bringing the suit. He's worried that millions of Twitter users are getting banned. Is he really crying crocodile tears because, gee, these poor people are getting banned by Twitter? No, that's not what it's about. It's about his right to be able to weigh in to the political debate using social media, which has been one of the most effective things that he did, right? He started this whole thing in a way by using a political platform. Used to be a bully pulpit, right? Teddy Roosevelt. Today, it's Trump's Twitter pulpit, and he used it very effectively. And then what did the social media companies do? They kicked him out. So he doesn't have that, that one element in his basket of political, what weapons, but political things that he could use effectively to promote himself. He doesn't have it, and he wants it back. I don't think he's going about it the right way. And if I were him, I'd say to Twitter, hey, Facebook, look, I'll make an agreement with you, we'll have an independent committee, or we'll have some, a bipartisan committee or something to look at what I'm doing. And if I cross the line, you can take off my tweets, but please let me back in. But he's not doing that, right? He comes up with a lawsuit of 35 pages, which amounts to nothing. I mean, it's literally, it's kind of what the, I don't want to say this, kind of what the Chinese said about the Permanent Court of Arbitration. It's just waste trash paper. I mean, what is the point of this? I mean, to take the time of the courts with this case, I mean, they're busy doing other things and serious things. If Trump wanted to be a social influence, he should say, let's debate Section 230. Let's talk about that. Let's have a conference. Let's have a discussion. But he's always focusing on himself. And again, it's all about his legacy. Is it January 6th? I think it's a mistake to focus on that.
Maybe that is the purpose, to force people like us to have conversations like this and to keep the conversation in the headlines. On a First Amendment example, let me think. In a town, somebody's going to give a speech. A politician is going to give a speech. He wants to give it in the town hall, and for whatever reason, the town elders say, "We don't want you to have it in the town hall, but you can have it in the square outside." Now, isn't that that wouldn't, I think, be against anyone's First Amendment rights if they're allowing it to happen somewhere. But here we've got multiple platforms that have said, we don't want you on our platform, but there's nothing to stop you from setting up your own, which is what indeed Trump has done. Has he undermined his case by earlier this year setting up his from the desk of Donald Trump, albeit it didn't work out for him, but has that undermined his argument that he's being totally censored on the internet?
Well, I mean, look, he needs Twitter and Facebook. That is the platform that has power, right? And the analogy to the town square is very interesting. That's kind of what he's saying. He's trying to say, this is the town square, you know? I'm speaking at the town square, just like I spoke on January 6th. I don't know, wherever I speak, I'm the former president. When I speak, I'm the president. And when I speak as the president, former president, I talk about important issues of politics. That's true. That's a factor in the issue of freedom of speech cases, is whether it's a matter of public interest. But this is not that. This is a private company that set up a business in which they give you access if you agree to their terms and conditions, and you can go ahead and post things. But if you don't agree, it's kind of a contract thing too. You mentioned the terms and conditions. That's a contract. If once you agree to do it, you're making a private contract with someone that basically says, I'm sure if you cross the line and you don't follow these rules, you're going to get booted from this platform. I mean, it's obvious. Now, it's in their discretion. Should they have banned him? Should they not have banned him? Well, one could argue that they're taking sort of a public interest approach. So I think that would be deleterious to their point a little bit. But I think at the same time, they're trying to be sort of socially responsible without having the legal responsibility of the government to be responsible for compliance with the First Amendment. Now, you can't go out in the town square and actually get a permit to have a riot. You can't do that. No. You can't incite. That's what the Supreme Court said, but we're not doing that. I mean, that's not what he's doing. He's in a private operation, just like the Trump organization. I mean, does a Trump organization give freedom of speech to everybody? I mean, it's sort of a, if you think about it, it doesn't fly. It doesn't work. It's private contract. You don't agree to it, they can kick you out. That's how it works. I mean, I don't think it gets more complicated than that. He wants to be in, as you said, Andy, in the public sphere, talking about stuff and having people think about him and talk about him all the time.
Let's just imagine
and he achieved that with social media. He wants to achieve it with the lawsuit.
Let's just imagine that this case isn't thrown out. It hasn't been. It's still proceeding. It proceeds. It goes to court. Could Donald Trump be putting himself in jeopardy in the sense that if it does go to court, then these social media platforms will have the right, I assume, to depose him? And since the topic is January the 6th, which is something that Donald Trump hasn't wanted to talk about publicly, that he will be forced to divulge his thoughts and any other issues that are surrounding January the 6th. So could it come back to bite him?
Well, not necessarily. Among the Trump supporters, talking about January 6th is sort of like, I don't know, aquatic enthusiasts talking about their swimming techniques. Right. I mean, I don't think that will ever hurt him. But for example, he brings up he has other plaintiffs besides himself to show how bad Twitter is to kick people out. And you have this Linda Quadros, who was kicked off Twitter because she wrote something about Cardi B, which was not very favorable. And then he has the American Conservative Union, which posted some things that, that Twitter didn't like. I just don't think that is so persuasive. I mean, he just wants to find other plaintiffs that can kind of, complain that they were kicked off Twitter, and it was very, very bad to do that. But again, the constitutional point here, and that's the one, your former president, that's the one you would think at first blush that would have strength to it, but it doesn't have strength because the Facebook company and the Twitter company, they have rights of free speech also. And so it's contending rights, but the rights are always, as you said, that the government is bound by this, not the private companies. And that is a misnomer. Many people think about Facebook and Twitter as public companies. They're not public. They're private. And in fact, they're businesses, aren't they? I mean, what they're doing is they're not allowed, the way I would see it to be realistic is they're not allowing, you and me and others to have the pleasure of, posting and writing things and that's not what it's about. It's a private company that has a bottom line and has a balance sheet, and they're making money, and they're tracking people's preferences and all the things that they do. They have a business plan. He's coming along and saying to them, well, you're really not a private company. You're so influential. You're really a social actor. And the Democrats have been, enabling you by passing legislation. I mean, it doesn't even, in our baseball game, it doesn't get to first base, let alone to a home run. It doesn't get anywhere. Now, why do it? Well, again, he's also angry about it, obviously, and he wants to get out into the public, to his base, to his supporters, and be able to get them to vent also about it. So there's a political element to that, and he's still in the game, I guess, for 2024, I suppose. Otherwise, why bother?
Well, we'll see. See where that goes. Mark, stay with us. We'll just have a look at a video together and then have another short chat. Dozens of US states are suing Google, saying that it used unfair practices to maintain a monopoly for its App Store on Android phones.
37 US state and district attorneys general are suing Google. They say the tech giant bought off competitors and used restrictive contracts to maintain a monopoly for its App Store on Android phones. The states say Google forced some apps to pay 30% commission on their sales. They say that helped it generate enormous profit margins and left consumers paying more. The states want a refund for Play Store customers and civil penalties for Google. They say Google also intended to pay Samsung, whose rival App Store posed the biggest threat, to stop competing. The Silicon Valley firm has rejected the charges. Google says the litigation is more about boosting a few major app developers who want preferential treatment.
So, Mark, the big media companies are in the firing line at the moment. We've just been talking about Donald Trump and his case against the social media companies. Now, Google Alphabet Group is under fire for pushing its apps on its platform. What needs to be done does there need to be some sort of commission or something to look at these media companies?
Well, it's sort of reminiscent of the breakup of the phone company and the baby bells and all. I mean, these companies have gotten very, very big. And in fact, on Congress, they are talking about breaking up these big tech giants. They are definitely a target of bipartisan interest. Now, these cases, I think there was a private company, I can't recollect the name of it. I think they just recently sued either Google or Facebook, I think Google, for basically this thing, which is basically, putting them in a situation where Google is taking funds and basically holding them hostage to allow them to be on their app store, all the things you said. So those cases, and maybe the state cases you talk about, the attorneys general, that might have legs. Those cases are very different than the one we talked about before, because here it could be a matter of, on the state side, they would have to show that there was injury to citizens in their respective states. Otherwise, they wouldn't have standing, right? They wouldn't have standing. You have to have injury in fact. So there, states can sue on behalf of their citizens for injury to their citizens. And one could argue that maybe there is an injury here in terms of possibly, and I'm not going to use fraud, but consumer fraud or some consumer practice that's inappropriate. Where I think where they have vulnerability is to other companies that use their app store, use their platform, and the terms and conditions of how that operates. Again, you can argue, as we talked about before, it's a contract, right? But again, the question is, they're getting so big that they are in the crosshairs of public interest organizations, of Congress, of the Senate, and the idea is you're too big and we need to break you up. And that has been the antitrust mantra in this country about big business. We did it with Standard Oil, we did it with the phone companies, and now comparability to this social media. These companies are mega bazillion-dollar companies. I don't think anybody ever predicted this would happen. Mm-hmm. We had this conversation 20 years ago. You would say to me, what are you talking about? What are you, Nostradamus? You're talking about some crazy future. This is the world that we live in today. These companies are gigantic. So there may be a move to do that. And that is pending in the state legislatures and in the Congress, because there are state antitrust laws against monopolies, and there are federal antitrust laws against monopolies. And monopoly has always been the bête noire, if you will, or the thing that legislators do not like companies to become monopolies.
Well, obviously there are so many different issues surrounding the social media companies and the others that control them, like Google and so on. Sorry, I had their finger in the pie as well, like Google. And I'm sure plenty of fodder for the next semester at the State University New York Maritime College, and your students will have lots of great essays to write. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. Fascinating discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Trump has lost his social media megaphone this year after the companies said that he violated their policies against glorifying violence. Hundreds of his supporters launched a deadly assault on the US Capitol on the 6th of January after a Trump speech repeating his false claims that his election defeat was the result of widespread fraud, an assertion rejected by multiple courts, state election officials, and also members of his own administration. Coming days and weeks will show the outcome of this lawsuit. We'll keep reporting on it. For now, let's move on to our next topic to speak about the record temperatures in North America. Climate change and environmental disasters are global problems, and the whole world suffers from their impacts. Our following infographic explains what you need to know. The heatwave gripping the west coast of North America is emboldening the scientific community in the US and Canada to raise their voices against the climate crisis.
A study has found that the suffocating heatwave that killed hundreds of people across the Pacific Northwest last week would have been virtually impossible without climate change. Scientists said climate change had made such a heat wave in the region 150 times more likely. The scientists estimated the extraordinary temperatures were a 1 in 1,000 year event, though noted this was difficult to quantify given the unprecedented heat in early summer. Scientists also warn that if current greenhouse gas emissions continue, an event so extreme could start occurring every 5 to 10 years by the 2040s. The heat wave gripped parts of the United States and Canada for days at the end of June, smashing records in dozens of cities. New research attributing the heat wave to climate change is not entirely surprising, as worldwide, climate change has made heat waves more common, more severe, and longer lasting.
Experts say that we're going to be confronted with similar heat waves more frequently over the next few years. Climate change is definitely one of the drivers of such incidents. We hope these weather conditions will raise awareness about climate change and encourage people to start taking more action against it. For now, let's move on to our final topic to speak about Turkey's successful fight against the coronavirus pandemic. The 1st of July, Turkey entered a new stage in its fight against the coronavirus pandemic. Almost everything returned to normal with regard to pandemic measures. Our infographic explains the new stage. More than 60% of Turkey's population above the age of 18 has received at least one dose of the vaccine. And the country has successfully administered around 56 million coronavirus vaccine jabs as part of its nationwide immunization campaign.
Turkey's vaccination programme is continuing in full swing to immunise the Turkish population against the coronavirus. Turkey has so far administered approximately 56 million coronavirus vaccine jabs as part of a nationwide immunisation campaign. More than 37 million people have received their first dose of the vaccine, while second vaccine doses have been given to some 16.5 million people. Data from the Health Ministry shows that the number of people who have received their third COVID-19 vaccine dose has crossed the 2 million mark. More than 60% of Turkey's population, aged over 18, have received at least one dose of the vaccine. People can choose between two vaccines, Sinovac and BioNTech, when their turn comes. Over 3 billion doses of coronavirus vaccines have been given worldwide so far, and Turkey currently ranks 9th on the list. Most COVID-19 vaccines are administered in 2 doses, so the number of shots given is not the same as the number of individuals fully vaccinated. Turkey is scheduled to achieve herd immunity this autumn, depending on vaccine supplies and people's willingness to get vaccinated. Turkey has recorded more than 50,000 COVID-19 deaths and over 5 million infections since the start of the pandemic. Amid a nationwide fall in COVID-19 cases, Turkey put an end to all restrictions, including nighttime curfews and full lockdown on Sundays.
Turkey's vaccination programme is continuing in full swing to immunise the Turkish population against the coronavirus. Turkey is expecting to achieve herd immunity this autumn, depending on vaccine supplies and people's willingness to get vaccinated. Now, before closing our programme, let's take a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top story, shared with the hashtag Trump. And here's what she had to say on Twitter about Trump. Eve for America says, I'm incredibly grateful that Trump has filed a class action lawsuit against censorship. Maybe the screenshots I have of my shadow bans will come in handy. Not to mention Twitter analytics showing the loss of tens of thousands of followers and a massive drop in engagements. And Genevieve Lakia says, I know I shouldn't give this lawsuit more PR than it's getting, but I feel obligated to point out that although Ari Cohn is surely correct that the suit is doomed to fail, efforts by government officials to pressure platforms into keeping up or taking down speech is a serious problem. And Lance Gooden says, Big Tech controls the speech of the American people online. Current path of doing nothing to rein in social media companies is not helping. That's why I stand with Donald J. Trump's decision to sue Facebook, Twitter and Google over censorship. And let's take a look at our video of the day, which highlights the ethnic cleansing in Al Bustan neighborhood in Silwan, where in a few hours Palestinian residents have only two choices: self-demolition of their houses or demolition by the Israeli occupation forces.
احنا هون في منطقة سلوان جنوب المسجد الأقصى، هي قدامنا. واحنا منطقة سلوان جنوب المسجد الأقصى، الحي اللي بيحمي المسجد الأقصى، احنا من هاي المنطقة.
بما اني انا بنت سلوان، انا مسقط رأس سلوان، بيتي ما بعدش دقيقتين ونص او 3 دقائق عن بيت اهلي، فهذا بيعني لي شيء كثير بصراحة. يعني انا اهلي جنبي، عيلتي جنبي، اولادي حوالي، فهذا بيعني لي شيء كثير. هم اجوا علينا جيان، احنا من هون، جدودنا من هون، انا سيدي وسيد ابوي موجود في سلوان كان. فالله الوضع يعني كثير انه يعني بوجع بصراحه، يعني من ذكريات بدهم يمحوا لي اياها، ذكريات الماضي، ذكريات اللي كنت انا اطمح فيها لقدام، هذا كله بيمحوه، الحاضر كمان بيمحوه. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ان شاء الله ما بيصير الا بالخير.
الاحتلال الذي لا يأبه لأي قوانين ولا يجد من يردعه، ربما سيكون مآل 1500 نسمة في حي البستان، وبداية من هذه العائلة، عائلة نادر أبو دياب، ومن ثم ستتالى العائلات الأخرى، سيكونون في العراء نتيجة عنجهية سلطات الاحتلال وأنها فوق القانون الدولي وعدم وجود أي مؤسسات دولية تردع الاحتلال، وخاصة أن 63% من سكان حي البستان أطفال سيبقون في الشوارع بدون مأوى وبدون منازل.
تلقى 13 بيت عندنا متلقين في حي البستان زي هاي الورقة، ترجمناها وشوفنا شو فيها، انصدمنا، لأنه هاي قرار محكمة وبالهدف، يا إما بنهد بإيدنا يا إما هم بيجوا بهدوا. أنا عندي في البيت عندي 14 نفر ساكنين في الدار، احنا عائلة كبيرة، أنا وأولادي وأحفادي كنا ساكنين هون. إلي بحدود 5-6 سنين معاهم في المحاكم، أعطونا محاكم وإحنا عائلة وبدنا نعيش زينا زي باقي الناس. ما بعطوا رخص لأي إنسان عربي.
إيش الهدف؟
الهدف تهجيرنا من المنطقة سلوان. الدور هدول في عندهم قرارات هدم، فلما بيستلموهم مستوطنين وباخذوهم هذول ببطل عندهم قرارات هدم، بصير عندهم قانوني. عند اليهود قانون وعندنا احنا قرارات هدم. منطقة سلوان زي ما انت شايفتيها هاي كلها مهددة بالهدف. حي البستان اللي هم بيعتبروه مدينة داوود. فاحنا الوضع عندنا مش بسيط ومش هين، لأنه الوضع عندنا سيء جدا، وبطالبونا انهم مده لهم اكثر من 20 سنه، بيطالبونا في اخلاء البيوت وهدمها وسووا حديقه توراتيه للنبي، بيحكوا ادعوا انها مدينه النبي داوود.
هناك سياسه ومخطط من قبل سلطات الاحتلال لتصفية الوجود العربي والمقدسي، وخاصة فيما يسمى بالحوض المقدس الذي يبدأ هذا المشروع حسب التسمية العبرية من الشيخ جراح وصولا هنا إلى سلوان بما فيها البلدة القديمة. حقيقة في منطقة سلوان يحاول الاحتلال إفقاد الناس الأمان النفسي الاجتماعي حتى الديني، ولذلك حتى مساجد في سلوان هي مهددة بالهدم، والأمن الروحي أيضا. أصدر ما يسمى بقانون كامينيتس من عام 2017، حيث أن من بنى بعد هذا التاريخ لا يمكن التمديد أو حتى مخالفة الشخص، بل يسري عليه قانون الهدم والطرد. ولذلك حتى يعني هذه المنازل في حي البستان الآن 13 منزل و100 منزل في حي البستان تسلمت أوامر هدم، ولكن 13 منها تسلمت أوامر تنفيذ الهدم، ومنها هذا المنزل الذي نجلس فيه الآن.
And that's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy Boynes. Stay tuned, as we'll be back next time with another look from Beyond the Edge.